Hello there. So, here I am back to talk about the forms of government, or rather, forms of democratic governments across the world. Now, the Westminster system, as we know, popularized by the UK Parliament, where the Queen or a head of a state appoints a Prime Minister. The Prime Minister commands a majority in one of the houses of the Parliament, usually the lower house, and he or she is from a party which commands the majority of members of Parliament, and they have a 4 to 5 year term, and then it goes on. Usually in such scenarios there is no term limits, so as long as a party has a strong leader and delivers on certain parameters which are important to people, he or she keeps getting elected, be it Baroness Thatcher, be it Tony Blair, and most recently the man to win 2 terms, David Cameron in the UK. Similarly, Australia had John Howard, who was the last longest serving prime minister. Japan had Shinzo Abe. Israel has Benjamin Netanyahu. Canada had Stephen Harper, now Trudeau in his third term. And India, obviously, for the last 10 years, some people like it, some people don't like it. Some people call it a fascist government, some people call it a best government ever. I'm one of the bucks, so I still feel that we have got one of the best governments ever. But as a system, the Westminster system is a failure. Let me just tell you why. Let's look back at the United Kingdom. Why I keep referring to United Kingdom? Yeah, maybe because I'm an Indian and we were ruled by the Brits for way too long, and a lot of our political systems are just plain copy paste from the Brits. But otherwise also, it is one of the oldest functional systems, the Westminster system. So I look at them. Look at Britain. Let me rewind a bit. I'm in my 40s now, and I've been an avid political watcher across the globe for the last 2 decades, since I was in my 20s, and even before that from an Indian perspective. But let me talk from 97 onwards, to be precise. The Conservatives lost power in 1997, and then the Labour Party came into power. So Tony Blair had won 2 terms with huge majority. He had won a third election also, and somewhere in 2005 or 2006 he had to step down, or he had to promise to step down, because of his alleged deal with Gordon Brown. Then Gordon Brown probably presided over one of the worst tax increases in United Kingdom, and he had to step down. Post that, the Tory parties were completely in a disarray, and David Cameron had energized them, and he won in an election. Obviously, his first government was not a majority; it was a coalition with the Liberal Democrats, and his second government, unexpectedly, he won a very simple majority. And then he had to step down on a very flimsy issue of Brexit. I don't know why he did that, because he was a stay supporter, and when the country voted to leave, he found that it will be on thin ice, and he probably foresaw some of the problems, so he stepped down. And some say he was a coward who escaped. Post that, the Conservatives have been in a complete disarray. They've seen Theresa May, Boris Johnson, they've seen Liz Truss, and now Rishi Sunak probably is a scapegoat. I've talked about this in my earlier views in Twitter as well. He's a scapegoat, and I still don't think, even if he delivers, he will not be the leader for the next election. But that's some other time. If you look at the Labour Party, post uh, Gordon Brown, probably the best leader they had was David Miliband, but they chose his younger brother, the other Miliband. They referred to him as the other Miliband, and he got chosen. And then he ran into an unexpected defeat. He was expected to give a tough fight, or at least have a hung parliament, but he lost, and he again retired from active politics. I don't know, this system of losing one election and then going into oblivion doesn't seem just right to me, but that happens in most of the foreign countries these days. What happened after that? They elected a very radical leftist, uh, Jeremy Corbyn. He did improve on her performance once, but then he could not do much. Now the current leader, Keir Starmer, he's simply waiting for the Conservatives to fail so that he can waltz into power. And I don't know whether it's going to happen or not. I am not that much an active reader of the foreign politics. Coming to Canada, Stephen Harper commanded a good majority. Today won first majority. Second, I think, was a reduced. His third government now is in a coalition with one of, again, the Khalistani guy, Jagmeet Singh. And I don't know, people are still waiting for him to go. He's there because, simply not because he's irreplaceable. They don't have an alternative at the moment. The alternatives are terrible. Look at Australia. John Howard was the last prime minister I know. Then Kevin Rudd, Julia Gillard, this, that, Scott Morrison, and then some other person came in. Before Scott Morrison, there was someone from his party. And very curiously enough, Australia is known as the coup capital of the democratic world. Why do they call it the coup capital of the democratic world? If you check after John Howard, every 6 months or so, or 1 year or so, they had this what they call in Australian term as leadership spill. What do you mean by leadership spill? Somebody challenges the prime minister. Now, why does this happen? You win an election under one person and you can't stay united? I mean, good or bad, at least you should give that man one turn to run. Otherwise, how will that person do? Similarly, in Japan, we had the Liberal Democratic Party, or the LDP of Japan, run the government for much long. And then in between, there was another party, I'm just forgetting the name of that party in Japan. They won an election, surprise victory, and then they had the most destabilized government. The people chose Liberal Democratic again. I think the last Liberal Democratic Prime Minister was Koizumi or something. I'm not remembering. But after that, there have been a lot of Prime Ministers. Then Shinzo Abe gave a very stable government. Then after Shinzo Abe, there's been Naruto Kan, and I believe there is one Kumio Fushida. Still, he's struggling, or I don't know. He just won an election, so we have to wait and watch. Then similarly, Italy, Silvio Berlusconi, after that it has been a disarray. They had a technocrat lead a government, it was here and there. Hungary, I think, has a stable government. But if you look at other places, it has been like that. The Westminster system simply is failing because the more liberal or woke you become, you don't trust in one leader. In some cases, there is a term limit. Even when there is no term limit, people don't want to report into a leader. They think we are all equal and the prime minister is the first among equals, which is how most of the constitutions across the world define it. But if you keep on doing it, then you should be as mature as Switzerland to have 8 or 9, a presidium of presidents, and run it properly. You have never seen any problem in Switzerland. But if you don't do that, then your country is going to suffer. There is going to be an implication. We had a 10-year government, which the Congress called stable government, but we had a robo prime minister. I'm sorry to use that word, but that's what he was. A powerless prime minister who had no mass base of his own. And there were extra constitutional bodies like the National Advisory Committee and a bunch of hooligan coalition parties from regional. And by the end of the second term, they had a policy paralysis. I still favor the United States system of government. People may question me. Yes, there has been deadlocks in the Senate and the House. And in the second term, usually a president is called as a lame duck president who cannot push through policy decisions. But still, the president has some power. He has to stay in power for 4 until and unless he is impeached or he resigns or unfortunately he or she passes away. But otherwise, they have a mandate to govern. And similarly, the US Parliament somehow works. There is a midterm, so election, everything is governed. Until and unless there is a recall election, there is no haphazard election cycle like India. We may pride ourselves being calling the most functional democracy, but we have a pathetic system where the country is in election mode throughout the 5-year term. In some state government, legislature bodies, people pulling down governments. The best way is you decide on what sort of proportional representation you want. Ensure that to get a seat, a party must have a certain percentage. And then if you still want to follow the first past the post system, then probably it's better to move on to a presidential style where the head of the government and head of the state is one and the same. That person is term limited and that person has to serve for a minimum number of years in one term and then has to seek a mandate again. This way, some of the policy decisions, good or bad, will stick and there will be a single person to blame, take the blame and go down. And where if you have 2 major parties, both will have an equal chance. Otherwise, this whole system does not function as well as we expect. Now, UK is in a very pathetic state. I don't know what's going to happen to that country. But this musical chairs of leadership and Australia, I don't know how they are surviving. This is not going to help anybody in the longer run. It makes the country look weak. If you are like US, where there are other constitutional bodies, be it a Republican president or Democrat president, there are bodies, policy making bodies in US which know what is their interests are and they control them very well. And they have UK tied to them like uh, uh, tied to their apron strings as they call in English. UK will not do anything against the US. It's been so for the last half a century, and it will be like that for the next half a century, or at least that's my personal belief. So you want to develop institutions like US. They are the model for any democracy. They obviously they are not without their flaws. I'm not saying you have to copy paste, but at least we are not having an indigenous system. We have a very pathetic, outdated copy paste. Why not update it to the more functional copy paste is what my thought is.